without further ado, I'll get into it. This is my thesis project. It's titled Why Geothermal, an Analysis of Community Acceptance to Promote Energy Justice and Sustainable Development Strategies in Rural Argentina. And to just tell you a little bit about myself. So this was the degree I received from the Iceland School of Energy. It was in sustainable energy sciences. However, my focus was on geothermal policy and social governance. After graduating, I moved back to Texas, where I'm from, and I began a role as an assistant research scientist with the Bureau of Economic Geology, which functions as the state of Texas's State Geological Survey. We're also a part of the University of Texas here, and we're engaged in a variety of projects, much greater than solely geothermal. But within my role there, I research ways that geothermal development can impact disadvantaged communities, research methods for engagement, workforce development, and the associated economics. Beyond that, I also volunteer with the UNESCO IGCP 636 project. The IGCP, or otherwise known as the International Geoscience Program, began in 1972, and it facilitates international scientific cooperation within the geosciences. And IGCP projects deal with geosciences on global issues within 5 main themes: earth resources, global change, geohazards, hydrogeology, and geodynamics. So the 636 program, which is the Geothermal Resources for Energy Transition, falls under the Earth Resources Sustaining Our Society theme. And the primary objective of 636 is to promote the use of geothermal resources as a clean, low-carbon baseload and renewable energy. And our program targets are increasing knowledge and understanding of deep geothermal reservoirs, conducting outreach activities with focus groups and communities, and promoting the installation of geothermal heat pumps. So after the presentation, if any of that interests you, please contact me and you can join the initiative. So I also have a position with the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance. We are an industry-led advocacy organization within the state of Texas, designed for the purpose of advancing geothermal energy in Texas. This past legislative session at the beginning of 2023, we were able to successfully pass 3 new bills within the state of Texas, which clarified the ownership of heat, which is, of course, very important in the development of geothermal. Also streamlined the regulatory process for getting holes in the ground, and a bill which will now allow for geothermal operators to adopt abandoned oil and gas wells. So very important for environmental purposes here. And then my primary role is with Project InnerSpace. We're a global nonprofit organization focused on accelerating geothermal deployment around the world. We have a number of different research and mapping projects currently in the works, and I'd be happy to talk about those offline anytime. So to get into it, gonna have an introduction, go through some of the main themes of the research, give you my methodology, some results, and then we'll get into the discussion where things really get interesting and we can investigate, just what's going on in Varvarco in rural Argentina, and then my conclusions. So the first thing about this is, understanding social acceptance. And so the first research into this theme, or the non-technical factors of renewable energy, began in the 1980s, when people were looking at acceptance of wind power and the factors that went beyond public opinion of just wind power. And so it looked at political and regulatory roles within the process. And as scientists looked into this, a new framework for how to analyze the social dynamics emerged, and that was known as the triangle model of social acceptance. And within that, there are 3 primary categories, obviously, the triangle model there. So the first at the top is the socio-political category. It's the broadest level of social acceptance, and it refers to the general opinion of policies or technologies by various groups, such as the public, key stakeholders, or the policymakers themselves. And while public attitudes towards renewable energies are often positive among broad majorities, focus has shifted from global to local viewpoints. Support tends to change, and local policies and technologies might encounter local resistance. The third pillar of the triangle model is market acceptance, and that is the process that a renewable energy technology goes through before an innovation is widely accepted by both consumers and investors. The theory of this level of acceptance is rooted in supply and demand. And energy is not only tied to the physical siting of the project, but to the transmission of electricity into the grid. And therefore it begins to encompass stakeholders such as electrical companies, regional distribution networks, and utility providers. So this involvement of larger players at the national and international energy systems forms a special type of market acceptance known as intra-firm acceptance, and it tends to cross over with socio-political acceptance. And then the last pillar, which is the most relevant to what I'll be talking about today, is community acceptance. And this refers to the attitudes and opinions of local stakeholders, residents, local authorities on the siting and planning decisions around renewable energy infrastructure. So decisions by project developers are heavy with risks in this stage, which can be environmental, economic, and social. And for local communities, these risks may manifest in a number of different ways: increased taxes, pollution, safety concerns, noise disruptions, a number of things. So to understand social acceptance, you have to understand the bigger model, which is the social license to operate. This was born from the mining industry's attempts to improve their corporate social responsibility strategy, and has since been adopted by a number of industries around the world. And the theory or concept is increasingly discussed within the geothermal energy sector, as geothermal power plants tend to alter rural landscapes or any landscape, and therefore directly impact local environments, culture, health, and economy. And given the complexity of the social license to operate, measuring it is often difficult. But Amel Barrick of the Iceland's Geothermal Research Cluster designed a conceptual framework for navigating the SLO specifically within the geothermal industry. And so this is what I'll be showing you here now. So on the left are the levels. On the left are the levels of the status of acceptance a project holds within a community. They are, the license is either being withheld, withdrawn, it's accepted, it's approved, or it's co-owned. So that's when the community really feels like they're a part of the development. And your goal, of course, is to move up the scale, which is what that animation was supposed to show there. But then the barriers to this are kind of the challenges that are listed here in the black text, right? So when you're in a withheld level, you can experience legal challenges, conflicts in values, local boycotts. As you move up, you tend to come into different barriers until you've reached the top, where you're actually seeing support from the community, advocacy from the community for the project, and things of that nature, which is where you want to be at. And so within that, after the barriers, you can see how social license applies to social acceptance. When you're in the middle of social acceptance, you're probably in the approval to acceptance stage of the SLO, and the same can be understood here for high and low acceptance. And who is the ones who are determining this? This is the stakeholders, of course, and you want to move up the scale here. So the way to do that, it has been determined by some, is community engagement. So within community engagement, there's a few pillars that have been identified by geothermal social scientists. They're the avoidance and reduction of unfavorable impacts, the generation of added benefits for surrounding communities, and just the community engagement practices themselves. And given the nature of geothermal resources, attempts to exploit the resource often mean affecting communities. And therefore, before any physical progress occurs, these engagement activities should take place involving the core local stakeholders to start the project with a sense of transparency and inclusion in order to build trust. And when engagement strategies like those listed here occur early on in the project, developers have an opportunity to establish community acceptance. The relationship can advance through specific stages, but really what you're trying to get is that you're achieving that SLO, and where the community wants you to build the project in their home. And so the research I did here essentially was to begin the engagement practices, the socioeconomic study, identifying groups of actors, consultation, and the awareness campaign. So to give you a little sense of where this actually took place, Varvarco in Neuquén province in Western Argentina It's actually the largest oil and gas producing province in Argentina. So for future geothermal development, kind of an interesting consideration. But as you can tell, Varvarco itself and the geothermal field in question are in the top left corner of the province, very remote, very tough to get to, closer to Chile than most places in Argentina. This is an aerial view of the urban zone of Varvarco, as I will refer to it for the rest of the presentation. And to us, this isn't urban, but when you see some of the images of the rural community later, you'll understand why there's the breakdown of urban and rural. And so to give you a little idea of the distance from Varvarco to the actual volcano, the volcano is known as Domuyo. It is seen here in the darker green on the map. And then the study area for my project was really everything in the purple dotted line here. And since we're talking to the Geological Survey, I thought I would throw in just a little bit of information about the geology of Domuyo. So when the Japanese International Cooperation Agency did the initial research on this zone back in the 80s, they identified 3 primary zones to investigate further, which was the Western Zone, several surface manifestations, water type dominance with geothermometry temperatures under 200 Celsius. So it was determined that the West Zone was distant from the heat source. The transitional zone in the middle covers an area with several more thermal manifestations and geothermometry above 200 Celsius, with the basement basement exceeds 800 meters, indicating the existence of a collapsed structure with the development of associated fractures. And this section is assumed to have been hydrothermally altered and presents high temperature as indicated by geophysical studies. And within the East Zone, within the East Zone, no fumaroles, or actually there's one very high up on the mountain. The temperatures exceeding 200 Celsius once again, but the area is made up of a thick succession of tertiary formations in Mesozoic. And after the JICA analysis, they determined that the transitional zone was the most ripe for development, which was then broken into areas A and B, which you can see here on this map, a little more detail. So area A is about 22.5 square kilometers. A little bit of information was that the geophysical survey indicated a structure that would have originated from the collapse of the basement and a subsequent superimposition of the layers, and the concentration development of faults and crush zones in A is expected to provide the potential reservoir that extends laterally and in depth. And so area A was actually the zone that was deemed to be the most ripe for some geothermal operations. So on to the actual survey itself. It was 38 questions divided into 3 sections. It was a combination of original questions and questions modified from other research studies, which investigated community and knowledge or acceptance in similar circumstances. And these were actually 3 different studies. One study was an online survey exploring awareness and acceptance of geothermal among stakeholders in Belgium, Canada, Chile, Colombia, and France. There was also a study of local communities affected by development of geothermal energy in Indonesia. And then finally, social acceptance of geothermal in southern Italy. And so the point of this was to get questions that were similar to the level of knowledge I figured the folks in this community would have. The data was gathered through a combination of door-to-door interviews, which was about 35 of the interviews, with 2 online surveys being completed. And so to get into it, acceptance and comprehension, 13 questions in this section designed to explore the opinions and perception of respondents on geothermal, also regional energy challenges, COVID-19 complications, and the level of trust in various information. So first question, what do you know about geothermal energy? Clearly, the community does not really understand what the geothermal I'm talking about in this scenario is. What do you know about the existence of geothermal energy in the area where you live? Once again, most know hardly anything. I think 2 people were familiar with the term and understood it to be in their community. What do you know about the benefits of geothermal? A lot of different answers here. However, the main one was that they don't know any benefits. So starting with a blank slate. What is your opinion on the development of geothermal energy in the Demullo district? So this was interesting because even you can begin to see the trend of that. Even though the community doesn't know what geothermal is, they're positive development. And once we get into the real world situation, I think this will become clear to everyone as to why the community feels this way. What conditions must be met for you to support geothermal projects in your region? By and large, the 2 most important guarantees of respect for the landscape and protection of the environment, as well as not affecting the thermal waters, which were important cultural destinations for this group. Very important for tourism in the area, but also health benefits, things of that nature. I just like to comment that the choice, which was no matter the conditions, I will not support this type of project, was not selected by any of the community members. And to really, I wanted to ask them how COVID had affected their situation because I was in the community during 2021. And so for most of the world, this was right in the throes of the COVID pandemic. And I've thought for this community, was there new challenges presented for them? However, when I asked, are goods, gas, food more difficult to obtain during COVID? They said that it was never more difficult, or only one respondent said it was more difficult to obtain the services, but most of the respondents said that it was always difficult for them to get these goods during the winter. So what was a supply chain issue for us was just normal seasonal challenge for the people in Varvarco. So moving on to social dynamics, 19 questions designed to build an image of daily life in Varvarco, learn about community acceptance regarding geothermal resources and just general socio-demographic information. So here's some of that here for you: the education levels, number of people per household, access to a washing machine. Folks in the urban area had this, but not in the rural. Also, just interesting to talk about the change in the people per household. This was because a lot of these folks work as nomadic pastoralists. So the folks who are there during the summer are obviously not going to be the people who are there during the winter. How do you heat your home or business? Just to begin to understand how energy dynamics within the community works. So about 42% only gas to heat their homes. Some of these people were on the community gas network, while other are on private or personal networks. 31% using only firewood, 27% a combination of these. I interviewed 6 business owners within Varvarco. 1 uses electricity, 1 no heating at all, 3 are on the gas network, and 1 uses firewood. And of the respondents in the rural zone, all 6 only use firewood. It's just too difficult to get propane and gas to the folks in the rural areas. Is it expensive to heat your home or business? 10% not knowing, they weren't heads of the household. 37% no. Some sub data about that. Most of those people were the ones who were on the community gas network. But then the over 50% claiming yes, it was expensive to heat your home. This is because they're either using electricity, like the owner of the meat market because of his refrigerators, but because they were buying their own gas and gathering firewood. And of those in the rural zone, people said yes, it was expensive, or no, not expensive because we gather it from the fields. But of course, we all know how challenging this is. So social dynamics around the hot springs themselves. There was a initial question, which I don't have on the screen, but it was, what do you know about hot springs? And 64% of the people said that they only knew them as medicinal or having healing properties. 8% for tourism, 8% they knew very little. And about a handful of folks actually understood that hot springs are mineral-rich waters heated in the underground layer of the earth. And that's a quote from one of the more in-depth responses. But then when I asked what is their connection, you can see people were kind of related to the hot springs in the same way they knew about it. Either they don't know about it, no connection, they connect to it because it's a place of healing or some sort of family connection, natural beauty. But moving on into, do you think the hot springs should be developed? A resounding yes. You know, that people understood this as an opportunity to help tourism in their region, but also as an opportunity for jobs, which are a big issue in Varvarco. And some more questions about the development of the hot springs. So how do you feel about using it to heat your homes? 100% yes. How do you feel about more tourists coming? 100% yes. Would you like to have more tourists? 86% yes. And would you be happy if there was a job for your family at a geothermal power plant? 97% said yes. And the one individual who said no commented on this and said, you know, I just would want more information about the safety of the power plant, which I think we can all agree on is a reasonable ask. And so the only one of those that got a little varied feedback different than what I had expected was the how do you feel about using the heat from the hot springs to grow crops? And a larger percentage than I had expected wanted more information. Once again, probably could have worded the questions here better to give an elaboration of what some of this meant, but I didn't want to give too much detail before the survey. We had in-depth conversations with the respondents afterwards. So to keep moving on, comments and questions, these were designed to prompt a dialogue between the researchers and respondents. Kind of reached a point of saturation on these where I was getting a lot of the same answers over and over again. But what is a challenge in your community? You can see it's all the things that we've already talked about: heating, lack of employment, lack of food in winter, communication is tough, lack of drinking water. And then what is a problem in your community do you think could be solved with better access to heat or electricity? Once again, get a lot of the same answers, and you can see that they were already recognizing, you know, that their challenges could be addressed by just having better access to either heat or electricity. But now we're going to move on into the real world situation of Varvarco, and I have it under this title because it just shows you the conditions of the community and also why opinions are kind of the way they are. So the water in Varvarco, all of it for the town, and I forgot to mention this, Varvarco is about 500 individuals. And so all of those, or most of those individuals who are in the urban zone, they get their water from this single water filtration system here on the left, which draws its water from the river, the Varvarco River, which is on the right here, literally just out of frame on the picture on the left. As you turn and the water's right there, very basic system. And you know, the potability of the water is heavily affected by the volcanic minerals and other sediments found in this high alpine region of the Andes. You know, you can't drink the water unless you boil it. When it comes out of the tap, it smells very sulfuric. And besides the lack of local clean drinking water, the water truck, which delivers water once or twice a week, it's not always consistent during the summer, much less consistent during the winter. So there's often a lot of fears associated with water not being available during the winter. So families must ration appropriately. And also this unavailability of water affects food sources. So when you live in a high desert region like this in the Andes, you know, you don't have the best conditions for growing your own crops. So people have tried to produce greenhouses and they just fail because the water that they're using, it's too expensive to buy fresh drinking water, excuse me, and to use on your crops. So they're using water from the stream or from their tap, which the plants just can't grow. These are two greenhouses in the urban zone. And I just wanted to comment that it was interesting because in the urban zone, this is a challenge. Clearly, you know, they can't keep a greenhouse in check. But when we were in the rural zone, we saw that because the rural communities live closer to some mountain streams that are higher up than where the volcanic minerals can get into the flows that they're able to grow crops next to these streams. And it actually began to cause a little bit of competition, and people kept their food hidden and they kept their greenhouses as out of sight as they could, as to not have people come and steal their crops. So that kind of neighbor versus neighbor reality, not something you like to see. But so the gas and heating within Varvarco, so just like the water truck, the gas truck is unreliable. And when talking with some of the folks in Varvarco, there could be weeks at a time during the winter where the gas truck does not come, and that's a real threat to life in a zone where the temperature gets below freezing nightly, and just exacerbates challenges that already exist. But beyond just the gas truck not being reliable, there's two different gas trucks that come. And so one of them delivers for the community network, which you can see on the left. And also not every house within Varvarco is connected to the community network, which only goes to further generate disparities between those connected and those unconnected. But then there's also individual buildings within the community that have to rely on a different gas truck to come. And two of those that are the most pertinent to this, the development of sustainable development goals, would be that the school and the health center are not connected. So during the winter, the primary school closes and the health center closes. Electricity, also a huge challenge there. There was power cuts close to every other day. They lasted anywhere from 20 minutes to almost 7 to 8 hours. And of course, this is a huge challenge in a place like this, because it might mean all day you're without power, and then it goes into night, and you just don't know if you're going to get done that day what you needed to get done to make it through the night. But there's also a specific challenge here that I want to address. The electricity, the power cuts, they actually caused a power outage or shortage at the local mechanic shop. And so the gentleman here on the left photo who is sitting down, this is the equipment that was destroyed or rendered unfunctionable after the power cut, and the local utility provider is now refusing to help him replace the equipment. So now the only mechanic in town doesn't have a machine, and it's a human right issue. The government and employment in Varvarco are closely related. Most people in this community live below the poverty line, so there's jobs that the local government makes to help employ people and give them something to do and contribute to the community. However, there is some mistrust when speaking with the local community regarding the government. Apparently, there had been some jobs that were not exactly what had been promised, and so just a general level of mistrust, unfortunately, towards the local government. And so moving away from the conditions of Varvarco, I want to talk about the geothermal conditions of Domuyo. So JICA revealed that there was sufficient resource there to be developed, and then the Argentine energy sector study in 2017 went back and looked at this data and updated it, and their findings showed that the potential of the reservoir falls between the range of about 100 megawatts with plus or minus 15, based on a couple different simulations. And so the goal after the first wells are drilled, and depending on the factors which will be found from those drilling of those wells, is that a geothermal plant of a binary cycle method would be the most likely development there at Domuyo. So that means that everything under the requirements for a binary geothermal power plant could technically be in consideration for direct use projects. And so while not all of these might be what Varvarco needs, there is certainly opportunity for aquaculture or just the greenhouse and agriculture, just any direct use to build jobs, social development there in the community, and of course heat pumps, which I think would be great for a couple of the different groups. So, and moving on to the sustainable development goals, I think everyone knows them, but just to quickly touch, adopted in 2015, they're there to help call partnerships between developed and developing nations to create strategies that address the fundamental challenges to human development, and all the while helping to address climate change. And we know that geothermal achieves SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, but it can do a lot more than that. And the United Nations framework classification for geothermal back in 2021 with IRENA, the International Geothermal Association, and the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program identified these 7 SDGs, which geothermal energy production can address, which are great. But in my research, I really believe that geothermal can address all 17 of the SDGs, just with a little strategic thinking. Happy to talk about that another time. But in Varvarco itself, the geothermal, which would be of the most direct benefit to the community, are those shown here. So helping with poverty alleviation, hunger, improving health and well-being, offering better education opportunities, helping with the water supply, of course, clean energy, but then providing jobs and reducing inequalities amongst the community. And so energy justice, another thing that I really wanted to dive into on this, because it's going to be such an emerging topic as we continue our quest to answer the energy challenge of our generation. But before I get into it, I just want to show something on the screen here. I don't know if my pointer is showing here. I don't believe it is, but there's groupings of buildings within the community that are either government or public buildings. And so there's a couple areas that would be real easy for a few heat pumps at a much lower cost than developing a geothermal power plant could be implemented to really improve the community's acceptance of geothermal, get that first foothold in of showing, hey, this is geothermal, this is how it works, and hopefully build that SLO to the point where building a power plant is something they'd be interested in. But so back to energy justice, the realization that energy generation and supply systems are unevenly distributed is not a surprise. When one understands energy drives economic growth, and energy access is a basic human need. And while most of us are accustomed to access to energy, there's still 760 million people without access to reliable energy sources around the world. And within our current balance of powers, many of these individual voices are overlooked. The IEA has predicted that the developing countries will be the source for over 2/3 of the world's energy demand in the future. And so we really need to understand how we are developing these, and if we're developing systems of better access for these people, or if we're just doing the same methods we've done in the past. So energy justice analyzes where these injustices have occurred within the current energy system, and where they might occur in the future design of energy systems. And so the core of energy justice research considers the unequal distribution of the benefits of energy systems, not only from an access standpoint, but negative effects as well, such as pollution and displacement. And through literature review of energy justice, there's really 3 core themes. And so the first is decentralization, access, and sustainability. Decentralized energy systems are configurations where a power generation source is near the population it serves and is disconnected from the national power infrastructure. Decentralization is an important piece in combating energy injustices. And this deepening of resilience amongst communities ensures energy security and allows for diverse avenues for individuals to create sustainable futures. And while Varvarco may seem like a decentralized community because it's so far away from the national infrastructure, they still rely on gas to be delivered from far away. And so even though they look like they're decentralized, they're still very reliant on that national power infrastructure to deliver the gas to them. And so in regards to electricity, there is, unfortunately, I fear an energy injustice possibly in the making here, because the current plans for the Domuyo geothermal plant are to build a transmission line from Domuyo at the power plant to Las Ovejas, which is a community about 30 kilometers south of Varvarco, so 50 kilometers approximately south of Domuyo itself. And while that power line will feed energy from the geothermal power plant into the national grid, there's no plans to improve the line from Las Ovejas to Varvarco, which means that the people who will experience the most displacement or just new conditions because of the power plant really will receive none of the benefits unless some direct use is developed. And so the second pillar of energy justice, institutional instability and corruption. On the global scale, policy tends to prioritize access and availability for higher populations and economic centers above those found in rural communities. And so this desire to provide power to larger hubs tends to overlook the environmental or sustainability aspects of large-scale energy projects. And therefore, the challenges found in the decision-making process are often exacerbated in countries where economic and political instabilities historically exist. And Argentina is certainly one of those. Now, while institutional instability and corruption don't necessarily exist in Varvarco, when talking with the people about how they feel about their government, there was a lot of just general either statements saying, oh, they don't worry about us, we're kind of by ourselves, or even the opposite, saying we don't care about what they do, we know that we need to live on our own and really fend for ourselves. And this image is of one of the rural households. I really just want to show it to give an idea of just the vast difference between an urban zone and then you move into the rural zones, and this is what you're seeing. And that brings me to the third pillar or category of energy justice, which is marginalized communities and gender inequalities. Within the framework of energy justice, this group is defined as anyone, particularly indigenous, rural, or nomadic communities who are vulnerable to economic or energy developments. These are communities with little recognition at the political level and have almost no voice amongst decision makers when the siting of energy projects is discussed. And beyond just marginalized communities, there's a connection between gender and energy injustices. Historically, in lesser developed regions, women predominantly undertake gathering firewood for heating and cooking, and most areas where biomass is still used as a fuel source are far away from power production facilities. And just, of course, replacing obtaining firewood with having renewable energy resources it just opens up a lot of new opportunities for women or anyone to expand their education or whatever endeavors they wish to pursue. But within the community of Varvarco, it's really a marginalized community within a marginalized community, because you have two vastly different living conditions. Even though they're both in Varvarco and rural, you have people who live in that urban center where they have access to community gas network, that the electricity lines actually run to them. But then once you get into the zone where the power plant would be built, you have homes like this where absolutely no access to electricity. No one's going to build a power line to this house. They've been provided solar panels by a rural electrification program, I believe, in the early 2000s. And the sentiments among the community is, yeah, it's great, but it only works a couple hours out the day. It's old technology, needs to be replaced. And so when the project's going to be built, it's going to be built in places where folks just aren't going to be able to access the benefits it offers. And so that's why having some of the direct use programs for these people can greatly serve to address energy injustices, but also help with these folks reaching some of those sustainable development goals. So just as a recap of some of the things I've talked about, the survey results showed Varvarco as a community with very little prior knowledge of geothermal energy. However, the respondents already have a high level of acceptance to development of the resource. The most important conditions when constructing the Demullo power plant will be respect of the landscape and natural environment, an effective reinjection scheme to guarantee the hot springs are not affected, and the inclusion of a direct use or tourism program to create jobs for the locals. The cost of energy, access to electricity, gas, food, water, and biomass, and a lack of equal economic and educational opportunities are the greatest challenges the people of Varvarco face. And in conclusion, these barriers are barriers to sustainable development. The lack of access to everything that I mentioned. It's something that they're living with and they're comfortable with. But if we're talking about coming and developing a power plant in their backyard, we really need to be ensuring that they reap some of the benefits of this. And so regardless of their knowledge of geothermal, a lot of the majority of respondents had a positive opinion on developing this resource. And so the inclusion of a social impact program investing in ground source heat pumps or laundry or agriculture to grow food during the winter would solidify acceptance of geothermal technologies and promote Sustainable Development Goals 3 and 4. If these projects are integrated into the Demullo power plants, they will not only increase efficiency of the system, but can create numerous opportunities for direct and indirect economic advantages and advance a lot more of the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, if these direct use, Varvarco is a marginalized community which faces institutional barriers alongside unequal access to electricity and other resources. Geothermal development can mitigate this by incorporating lower enthalpy programs within the design of the larger scale geothermal power plant and work to counter the previous energy injustices which have occurred here. That's it for me. So thank you all.